The Democratic leadership meeting was supposed to be routine, just another day of political strategy. But when Hakeem Jeffries attempted to silence Jasmine Crockett in front of the entire caucus, dismissing her as too inexperienced for serious policy, he had no idea what was about to unfold. What happened in the next 30 seconds left everyone in that room utterly stunned, and it could very well have changed the future of the Democratic Party forever. But before we dive into this explosive story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on the latest political drama. Tension had been building for weeks. Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, had been consolidating his power, making it abundantly clear that the newer, more progressive members of the party needed to fall in line. But Jasmine Crockett, the fierce Congresswoman from Texas, wasn't going to just back down. She walked into that leadership meeting armed with receipts, documents that would expose Jeffries' hypocrisy and turn his own words against him in the most devastating way possible. This wasn't just another political disagreement. It was a generational clash that would ultimately define the soul of the Democratic Party. And Crockett was about to deliver a performance that would make Jeffries question everything he thought he knew about power dynamics in Congress. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Behind closed doors, whispers had been circulating that Jeffries was planning to marginalize the progressive wing of the party. Some sources even suggested he was considering removing certain members from key committee assignments. What Jeffries didn't realize, however, was that Crockett had been documenting every contradiction, every broken promise, and every instance when leadership failed to live up to their own standards. She came prepared for war. To understand the earthquake that was about to shake the Democratic leadership, it's essential to know the players involved and what led to this moment of reckoning. Hakeem Jeffries entered Congress in 2013 and quickly climbed the leadership ladder. At 54, he became the first black person to lead a major party in Congress when he assumed the role of House Minority Leader. Known for his sharp legal mind and his ability to stay on message, Jeffries built a reputation as a disciplined party leader who could unite different factions. He spoke in measured tones, rarely losing his cool, and prided himself on being the adult in the room. But beneath that polished exterior, some progressive members whispered that Jeffries was more interested in maintaining the status quo than pushing for real change. His background as a corporate lawyer before politics only fueled suspicions of his true priorities. While he publicly supported progressive causes behind closed doors, sources said he often resisted the more ambitious proposals from newer members. Jasmine Crockett, elected in 2022 from Texas's 30th District, represented everything Jeffries wasn't expecting when he became leader. The 43-year-old former civil rights attorney entered Congress with a fire in her belly and zero patience for political games. She made national headlines during committee hearings for her sharp questioning and fearless confrontations with Republican colleagues. Crockett wasn't impressed by titles or seniority. She cared about results. Her viral moments, especially during confrontations with Marjorie Taylor Greene, made it clear she wouldn't back down from anyone, regardless of their party affiliation. The tension between them had been simmering ever since Crockett arrived. Sources close to both offices revealed that Jeffries had privately expressed frustration with what he called Crockett's grandstanding during committee hearings. He believed her confrontational style was damaging the party's carefully crafted messaging strategy. Meanwhile, Crockett had grown increasingly frustrated with what she saw as Jeffries' willingness to compromise on issues that affected her constituents. She felt he was more concerned with maintaining his position than fighting for the people who had elected them. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The Democratic Party was at a crossroads. After losing the House majority, they needed unity to be an effective opposition, but they also needed to energize their base and prove they were fighting for progressive values. This confrontation would determine whether the future of the party belonged to the measured, institutional approach of leaders like Jeffries or the fierce, uncompromising advocacy of members like Crockett. What made this moment so explosive was that it wasn't happening in public. This wasn't a televised debate or a Twitter battle. It was a private leadership meeting where members were supposed to air grievances and find common ground. Instead, it was about to become a battlefield. a moment that would define the Democratic Party's direction for years to come. The meeting was called to discuss strategy for upcoming legislative battles, but Jeffries had a hidden agenda. He planned to address what he called message discipline among newer members, and Jasmine Crockett was his primary target. What Jeffries didn't know was that Crockett had allies who had warned her about his plans. A progressive member who had been in leadership discussions texted her the night before, saying, "Tomorrow's meeting isn't just about strategy. Be ready." She spent hours that evening compiling data, pulling press releases, and building what would soon become the most devastating political presentation in recent Democratic Party history. As the members settled into their seats, veteran staffers noticed something unusual. Crockett had brought a thick folder, in addition to her tablet, something she'd never done before. Her usual casual demeanor had been replaced with laser focus. She barely looked up from her notes as other members chatted around her. Representative Katie Porter, sitting nearby, later said she could sense something big was about to happen, just from Jasmine's energy. The meeting started like dozens of others. Members filed into the secure conference room on Capitol Hill, coffee cups in hand, ready for another strategy session. But there was something different about the atmosphere this time. Several senior members noticed Jeffries seemed more tense than usual, checking his notes repeatedly. Crockett arrived right on time, taking her usual seat toward the back of the room. She had her tablet open, reviewing what looked like prepared remarks. A few members later said they noticed she seemed unusually focused, not engaging in the typical pre-meeting small talk. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded normally. They discussed upcoming votes, messaging strategy for the week, and coordination with Senate Democrats. But then Jeffries shifted the focus to what he called internal matters. "We need to talk about message discipline," Jeffries began, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor, serious, deliberate. Members knew he was about to make a strong point. "Some of our newer members have been freelancing in ways that undermine our collective strategy." The room grew quiet. Everyone knew this wasn't just a theoretical discussion. Jeffries continued, "When we go off script during committee hearings or make statements that contradict our agreed-upon positions, it hurts all of us. We can't have members pursuing personal agendas at the expense of the caucus." Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Several progressive members exchanged uneasy glances. They all suspected where this was heading. Then Jeffries made it explicit. "For example," he said, pulling out a tablet, "some members have used committee hearings as platforms for viral moments, rather than serious legislative work. This kind of behavior might get social media attention, but it's not how we build coalitions or pass meaningful legislation." That's when Crockett looked up from her notes. She knew exactly who he was talking about. "We need our newer members to understand that experience matters," Jeffries pressed on, his voice growing more confident, feeling he had the room's attention. "Congress isn't about creating moments for TikTok. It's about the serious business of governance." And frankly, some of our members seem more interested in their online followers than in following the leadership's strategic direction. A few senior members nodded, but the progressive wing of the caucus was becoming visibly uncomfortable. Jeffries wasn't done. "I've had conversations with committee chairs who are concerned about members who seem more interested in confrontation than collaboration. We can't have people who are still learning the ropes thinking they know better than leadership with decades of experience." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Crockett slowly closed her tablet and looked directly at Jeffries. Several members later said the energy in the room shifted completely. "Are you talking about me specifically, Leader Jeffries?" Crockett asked. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge that made everyone stop and listen. Jeffries paused, clearly not expecting such a direct response. "I'm talking about patterns of behavior that concern me and other senior members," Jeffries stammered, clearly caught off guard. Crockett repeated slowly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Like what pattern specifically?" The room was dead silent now. Even the staffers standing along the walls had stopped moving. Jeffries seemed to realize that he had pushed too far, but he was committed now, trapped in his own words. Like using committee hearings for personal grandstanding instead of serious oversight, he began. Like making statements that contradict positions we've agreed on as a caucus. Like prioritizing viral moments over legislative effectiveness. That's when Crockett smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "So, you think I'm too inexperienced for serious policy work?" she asked, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You think I'm just here for TikTok moments and don't understand the serious business of governance?" Jeffries tried to backtrack. "I didn't say—" "Yes, you did," Crockett interrupted, a boldness in her voice she would never normally use with leadership. "You said newer members are still learning the ropes and don't know better than leadership with decades of experience. You said some of us care more about social media than serious legislative work. So let me ask you directly. Is that what you think about me?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Progressive members leaned forward in their seats, while senior members looked uncomfortable, their faces shifting as they realized what was unfolding. Jeffries realized he was in a trap of his own making. "Representative Crockett, I think we should discuss this privately," Jeffries stammered, clearly panicked. "No," Crockett said firmly, standing up. "You brought this up in front of the entire caucus. You questioned my seriousness and experience in front of everyone here. So let's address it in front of everyone here." That's when several members realized that Crockett hadn't just been taking notes at the beginning of the meeting. She had been preparing for this exact confrontation. Hakeem Jeffries was about to learn just how serious and experienced Jasmine Crockett truly was. What happened next would be talked about in Democratic circles for years to come. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself. She systematically dismantled Jeffries' arguments and exposed his contradictions, leaving the entire room stunned. "Leader Jeff," Crockett began, her voice now carrying the full authority of someone who had prosecuted cases in federal court. "You want to talk about experience and message discipline? Let's talk about it." She opened her tablet and pulled up what looked like a prepared presentation. The fact that she had come ready for this fight was becoming crystal clear to everyone in the room. "You say I'm too inexperienced for serious policy work? Let me remind this caucus of my qualifications, since apparently they need clarification." Her voice was steady, professional, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of steel that made every ear in the room perk up. "I spent over a decade as a civil rights attorney. I've argued cases in federal court. I've represented clients before the Supreme Court. I've negotiated settlements worth millions of dollars for people who were denied their constitutional rights. That's before I ever ran for Congress." She locked eyes with Jeffries as she continued. "And since arriving in Congress, I've introduced 17 pieces of legislation, co-sponsored over 200 bills, and secured over $50 million in federal funding for my district, all in less than 2 years." The room was completely silent. Several members were taking notes, their eyes widening as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. But Crockett wasn't done. "But you want to talk about my committee work being just viral moments?" Her voice sharpened. "Let's examine that claim." She swiped to another screen on her tablet. "In the Oversight Committee, my questioning led to 3 federal investigations being opened. My work on the Judiciary Committee resulted in policy changes at the Department of Justice. My viral moments, as you call them, have produced real legislative outcomes." AOC was nodding, and several other progressive members were sitting forward, energized by watching someone stand up to leadership. But Crockett wasn't finished. "Now, Leader Jeff, let's talk about message discipline and following leadership's strategic direction." This was where things got devastating. "You criticize me for making statements that contradict positions we've agreed on as a caucus. Can you give me a specific example when I've done that?" Jeffries opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett held up her hand, cutting him off. "Because I have several examples of times when you've contradicted positions that our caucus agreed on." She swiped to another screen. "Should I share them with everyone here?" The color drained from Jeffries' face. He clearly hadn't expected her to come with specific examples of his own inconsistencies. 3 months ago, Crockett continued, this caucus agreed to support the Justice in Policing Act without amendments. 2 weeks later, you told reporters you were open to negotiations that would water down key provisions, contradicting our agreed position. Murmurs started around the room. Several members checked their phones, apparently looking up the statement Crockett was referencing. 6 weeks ago, we agreed to oppose a defense spending increase without matching investments in social programs, Crockett continued. But you appeared on CNN and said you thought a compromise position was possible. Again, contradicting our caucus position. Representative Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Progressive Caucus, was nodding vigorously. Other progressive members were now looking at Jeffries with new attention. But Crockett saved her most devastating blow for last. And Leader Jeff, she said, her voice now carrying a deadly calm, you want to talk about prioritizing viral moments over legislative effectiveness? Let's discuss your media strategy. She pulled up another screen that made Jeffries visibly uncomfortable. Your office has sent out 47 press releases in the past 3 months. 31 of them were about your television appearances or statements responding to Republicans. Only 16 were about actual legislation you've authored or co-sponsored. The room was now completely focused on Crockett's data presentation. Meanwhile, she continued, my office has sent out 23 press releases in the same period. 20 of them were about legislative work, constituent services, or federal funding I've secured. Only 3 were about media appearances. She looked around the room, making eye contact with multiple members. So tell me, Leader Jeff, who's really prioritizing viral moments over legislative work? The silence was deafening. Jeffries was gripping his pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. Several senior members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, but Crockett wasn't finished dismantling his argument. And that newer members don't know better than leadership with decades of experience. I agree that experience matters, but what kind of experience are we talking about? Her voice grew stronger, more confident. My experience is representing people who've been denied justice. My experience is fighting systems that were designed to keep people powerless. My experience is winning cases against opponents with more resources and more connections. She paused for effect. Your experience, Leader Jeff, is climbing the political ladder within an institution that many of our constituents have lost faith in. Your experience is maintaining relationships with people who've been part of the problem. Several progressive members were now openly smiling. Even some moderates looked impressed by the thoroughness of her preparation. So when you question my seriousness about governance, you're really questioning whether someone with my background, someone who fought for justice outside these halls, can be trusted to fight for justice inside them. The implicit criticism was clear. Jeffries represented the old way of doing things, while Crockett represented the change that voters had demanded. And when you criticize my confrontational style in committee hearings, she finished, you're really saying that you're more comfortable with members who don't push too hard, who don't ask the questions that make powerful people uncomfortable. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually started clapping at this point, though she quickly stopped when she realized where she was. Crockett looked directly at Jeffries for her final blow. Leader Jeff, I didn't come to Congress to learn how to play politics better. I came here to change a system that's been failing people who look like me and represent districts like mine. If that makes you uncomfortable, if that seems too confrontational, if that doesn't fit your idea of message discipline, then maybe the problem isn't with my approach. Maybe the problem is with leadership that's more concerned with maintaining the status quo than delivering the change our constituents voted for. The room erupted. Progressive members were nodding and murmuring in agreement. Moderate members looked stunned by the directness of the attack. Senior members allied with Jeffries appeared shocked that anyone would challenge leadership so directly and so effectively. Jeff tried to respond, but Crockett wasn't having it. Representative Crockett, I think you're mischaracterizing. Am I? Crockett shot back immediately. Because everything I just said can be verified. The press releases are public record. Your CNN appearance is on video. The legislative data is all available through the congressional record. She closed her tablet and remained standing, leaving the room in stunned silence. "Leader Jeff, you called this meeting to talk about message discipline and following leadership. But maybe what we really need to discuss is whether our current leadership is equipped to deliver the change our constituents are demanding." The challenge was explicit, and now, in front of the entire Democratic caucus, Jasmine Crockett had done more than defend herself. She had turned the tables, putting Hakeem Jeffries' leadership style on trial. And judging by the stunned faces around the room, the jury was still out on which approach would define the future of the Democratic Party. The meeting ended in chaos. After Crockett's devastating response, Jeffries attempted to regain control by calling for a recess, but the damage was already done. As members filed out of the conference room, the hallways buzzed with whispered conversations and urgent phone calls to staff and allies. Several progressive members immediately approached Crockett as the meeting broke up. AOC was overheard saying, "That was incredible. You came with receipts." Representative Ilhan Omar nodded approvingly, adding, "Someone needed to say it." But the reaction from the moderate and senior members was starkly different. Representative Steny Hoyer, the former majority leader, looked visibly uncomfortable. Several committee chairs shook their heads as they left, clearly disapproving of how directly Crockett had challenged leadership. Jeffries himself appeared shaken. Sources later reported that he stayed in the conference room for several minutes after everyone else had left, staring at his notes, making phone calls. One aide described him as rattled in a way I've never seen before. Within hours, details of the confrontation began to leak to political reporters. The first story appeared on Politico's website with the headline, "Freshman Dem delivers stunning rebuke to House Leader in private meeting." But that was just the beginning. By evening, multiple news outlets reported Crockett's presentation as thoroughly researched and devastating. CNN's congressional correspondent reported that multiple Democratic sources described it as the most direct challenge to party leadership they'd witnessed in years. The story gained momentum when video emerged of Crockett leaving the Capitol that afternoon. A reporter shouted a question about the tension with leadership, and instead of giving a typical non-answer, Crockett stopped, delivering an impromptu statement that would be replayed thousands of times. "I came to Congress to fight for my constituents, not to make leadership comfortable," she said, looking directly into the camera. "If doing my job effectively makes some people uncomfortable, that says more about them than it does about me." Progressive activists and online Democrats went wild. Hashtag Crockett Claps Back started trending within hours, with users sharing clips of her previous viral committee moments alongside quotes from her confrontation with Jeffries. One tweet, which garnered over 200,000 likes, read, "Jasmine Crockett just showed why we need more prosecutors and fewer politicians in Congress. She came with facts and receipts." Another viral post declared, "This is what accountability looks like." At Jasmine's feet, it wasn't just about defending herself. She had put leadership on trial. Progressive organizations quickly rallied behind her. The Working Families Party issued a statement calling her challenge exactly what Democratic voters have been demanding: leaders who hold their own party accountable when they're not delivering for working families. Move On posted a video compilation of Crockett's greatest hits in committee hearings with the caption, "This is what fighting back looks like." But the response wasn't universally positive. Establishment Democratic accounts pushed back, with one former congressional staffer tweeting, "There are ways to handle disagreements within the caucus. Publicly humiliating leadership isn't one of them." Third Way, a centrist Democratic organization, released a statement warning that internal conflicts distracted from the real work of opposing Republican extremism and winning back working-class voters. Jeffries' allies quickly began their own messaging campaign. Stories appeared describing Crockett's challenge as disrespectful and damaging to party unity. Anonymous quotes from senior Democratic sources suggested that her confrontational approach was exactly the kind of behavior that hurt the party's effectiveness. One story in The Hill quoted a longtime Democratic operative saying, "Hakeem Jeffries has united this caucus and led effective opposition to Republican extremism." Having that undermined by someone who's been in Congress for less than 2 years is exactly the kind of self-defeating behavior that cost Democrats elections. But these counter-narratives struggled to gain traction because Crockett supporters kept returning to the substance of her argument. Progressive media personalities repeatedly highlighted her legislative record and the specific example she cited of Jeffries contradicting caucus positions. Behind the scenes, the confrontation exposed deeper divisions within the Democratic caucus that had been simmering for months. Progressive members saw Crockett's challenge as validation of their frustrations with leadership's cautious approach. Representative Rocana was quoted in the Washington Post saying, "Jasmine raised legitimate questions about whether our current approach is delivering results our constituents expect. Those questions deserve honest answers, not dismissal." But moderate Democrats worried that the public nature of the conflict would damage the party's image. Representative Josh Gottheimer told reporters, "We need to be focused on holding Republicans accountable, not relitigating internal strategy disagreements in public." The Congressional Black Caucus found itself in a particularly difficult position, with both Jeffries and Crockett as prominent members. Sources within the CBC reported tense discussions about how to handle the situation without taking sides and what many saw as a generational and ideological divide. Recognizing that he needed to regain control of the narrative, Jeffries' team scheduled a series of media appearances designed to reframe the confrontation. His first interview was with MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell, where he attempted to take the high road. "I respect Representative Crockett's passion," Jeffries said, using his characteristic measured tone. "But leadership sometimes requires making decisions that not everyone agrees with. My job is to unite this caucus and advance our shared values, even when that means having difficult conversations." When Mitchell pressed him about Crockett's specific criticisms, Jeffries deflected, saying, "I'm not going to relitigate private caucus discussions in public. What I will say is that every member of our caucus brings valuable perspectives, and we're stronger when we work together." But the response felt weak compared to Crockett's detailed presentation, and political commentators noted that Jeffries seemed defensive rather than authoritative. Meanwhile, Crockett appeared on several progressive podcasts and gave interviews that reinforced her message. On Pod Save America, she expanded on her critique of Democratic leadership. "The question isn't whether I respect leadership," she said. "The question is whether leadership is delivering results for the people who elected us. My constituents didn't send me to Washington to be polite to people who aren't fighting hard enough for them." She was particularly effective when interviewers asked about accusations that she was being divisive. "Divisive compared to what?" she responded on one show. "Compared to the unity we had when Democrats controlled everything and still couldn't pass voting rights? Compared to the message discipline we had when we lost the House?" These appearances showcased exactly why progressive activists loved her. She was unafraid to criticize her own party when she believed they weren't fighting hard enough. Political analysts began speculating about what the confrontation meant for the future of Democratic leadership. Several noted that Crockett had essentially auditioned for a larger role in the party, while simultaneously weakening Jeffries' position. "This wasn't just a policy disagreement," wrote one prominent political reporter. "This was a younger, more progressive member demonstrating that she could go toe-to-toe with established leadership and win." And that has implications far beyond this one meeting. Some began floating Crockett's name as a potential future leadership candidate, noting that her legal background and media savvy made her a formidable political talent. Others suggested she might be positioning herself for a Senate run or even higher office. The confrontation also highlighted broader tensions within the Democratic Party about strategy and messaging. Progressive activists saw it as proof that the party needed bolder, more confrontational leadership. Moderates worried that internal conflicts were distracting from the fight against Republican extremism. 3 weeks after the confrontation, its effects were still reverberating through Democratic politics. Crockett's profile had risen dramatically. Her social media following doubled. Progressive organizations began featuring her at events, and she received invitations to appear on major news programs. More importantly, other junior progressive members began speaking more boldly in caucus meetings and committee hearings. Several sources reported that the dynamic had shifted, with leadership being more careful about dismissing concerns from newer members. Jeffries, meanwhile, had to rebuild relationships with the progressive wing of his caucus. He scheduled individual meetings with several progressive leaders and made subtle changes to his messaging strategy that acknowledged their concerns. The confrontation became a case study in how individual moments can reshape political dynamics. Crockett had turned what was meant to be a lecture about staying in line into a demonstration of exactly why the Democratic Party needed leaders who weren't afraid to challenge authority, even their own. Political science professors began using the incident in their classes as an example of how power dynamics in Congress were evolving. Georgetown University's Dr. Sarah Mitchell told her students, "This wasn't just a freshman challenging a leader. This was a masterclass in political preparation and strategic thinking." Crockett understood that in the modern media environment, being right is enough. You have to be right with receipts. The Harvard Kennedy School invited Crockett to speak about leadership in the digital age, specifically focusing on how she had used data and preparation to level the playing field against institutional authority. Her presentation became one of the most watched political speeches of the year, with students particularly impressed by her systematic approach to building an argument. As the dust settled, it became clear that this confrontation was just the beginning of a larger battle for the soul of the Democratic Party. The question was whether there would be more conflicts between establishment leadership and progressive members. It was whether those conflicts would strengthen the party by forcing important conversations or weaken it by creating public divisions. What everyone agreed on was that Jasmine Crockett had fundamentally changed her position within the Democratic caucus. She was no longer just a promising freshman member. She was a force that leadership would have to reckon with for years to come. And for anyone who doubted whether a first-term Congresswoman could stand up to entrenched leadership and win, Crockett had provided a masterclass in preparation, courage, and strategic thinking. The message was clear. The new generation of Democratic leaders wasn't waiting for permission to lead. They were taking it. If you enjoyed watching Jasmine Crockett dismantle Hakeem Jeffries with facts and receipts, make sure to subscribe for more explosive political drama. The battles within the Democratic Party are just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Hit that notification bell and let us know in the comments. Do you think Crockett was right to challenge Jeff so directly, or should she have handled it differently? The political wars are heating up, and we'll be covering every explosive moment.